So we have a conference coming up. It's Castle Fest 2019. Here's the URL. Check it out. And I have some good news. So it turns out the Ultrasound Fellowship is now participating in the ACGME match. There are 3 of us on this team. It's Mike Mallon, Matt Dawson, and I. And currently, I am the one that has the fellowship. It's kind of like the Ultrasound Podcast Fellowship. So if you're interested, go ahead and go on the website, check it out, and please feel free to email me with any questions. Hello, this is Jacob Avila of 5 Minute Sono, and today I'm going to show you how to look for pleural effusions on ultrasound. Your probe of choice is going to be the curvilinear transducer. It's going to give you the highest resolution image, and if you don't have that, the phased ray transducer would work perfectly fine. Now, as far as landmarks, I usually like to start around the mid-axillary line. It's going to depend on some people. It's going to be more posterior, on some people it's going to be a little more anterior. And what you want to do is you want to actually rotate that probe so that the rib shadow does not get in the way. So here I'm trying to get my view, and about right there you see that I have a rib shadow getting in the way and a rib shadow getting in the way there. This is why some people like the phased ray transducer, because they say that the rib shadow does not get in the way as much, but you can easily overcome that with the curvilinear transducer by simply just rotating it along the line so that you're parallel with the ribs, and then you have a much better looking image, and you have an image in which no ribs are getting in your way right there. So let's look at this image zoomed in a little bit, and there are 2 signs that we want to use to evaluate for the presence or the absence of a pleural effusion. That is going to be the mirror sign or the spine sign. Let's talk about the mirror sign first. Now this one, full disclosure, is not my favorite sign, but it's one that I find useful. So ultrasound machines, the way that they work is they assume that sound moves at the same speed in the body and that it only goes in straight lines. When you get into the interface between something liquid, such as the liver, next to something air, such as the thorax over here, an air-filled thorax, this interface will create a highly reflective surface for sound, which sound will just kind of bounce off of it just like a mirror. So the ultrasound machine will send down a sound beam, hit this echogenic particle. It's echogenic because the sound echoes off of it, right? So one sound beam is going to come down, hit that little echogenic particle, and come right back up to the transducer. It takes, let's say, X amount of time for it to come back, and so the ultrasound monitor will actually generate that image that looks like this. Now, another sound beam might come down and hit that reflective surface between the air and the fluid, the lung and the liver. It'll come down, hit that thing, bounce off of it, hit that echogenic particle, come back, hit the diaphragm, and then come all the way back up. Now, that took, let's say, X plus 2 amount of time for that reflection or that echo to come back, and so the ultrasound machine thinks that there's something on the other side of the diaphragm, when in fact it was just a mirror image of what's below the diaphragm. So if you see a similar echo texture above the diaphragm as below the diaphragm, that means that there's air in the thorax and therefore no pleural effusion. Probably my favorite sign is going to be something called the spine sign. You see these little kind of arches right here? These are the lumbar and low thoracic vertebral bodies. Now notice as soon as the diaphragm shoots off right here that these little spine shadows, they kind of go away. They just disappear. Obviously the patient still has a thoracic spine, but that air is not letting sound get to that spine, so it completely disappears. So if you do not see the spine extending past that diaphragm, the patient has air in their thorax and therefore no pleural effusion. This is the absence of both of those things. If you look below the diaphragm and above the diaphragm, notice that they have different echo textures. There's a very hypoechoic or dark fluid here compared to a relatively hyperechoic liver here. This is fluid. Additionally, you see these little spine shadows here. You notice how they are extending up and past the diaphragm. So you have a negative mirror sign, a positive spine sign, and that rules in a pleural effusion. Now you got to be a little bit careful sometimes with this spine sign because there are other things besides pleural effusions that can transmit sound. Over here we have a dense pneumonia, big consolidation here. When it's consolidated enough to transmit sound through the lung tissue, you will also be able to see some spine shadow up here. But notice that this is obviously one kind of mass. It's not fluid, so that's how you'd know the difference. Now over here, this is one that I've only seen a couple of times, but another one to still be kind of careful of. You can see spine here extending past the diaphragm here. This is the left side. This is the spleen. This is the kidney. We have spine extending past the diaphragm. This is actually a big hiatal hernia. So this is stomach over here above the diaphragm. A question I get asked often is, how do you tell, especially on the left side, if that fluid is intraperitoneal or intrathoracic? It can be a little bit confusing because intraperitoneal fluid likes to be above the spleen or more cephalad on that left side, and it all has to do with that diaphragm. If that fluid that you see is below the diaphragm, then it is intraperitoneal, and if that fluid is above the diaphragm, this white thing right here is the diaphragm, then that is intrathoracic free fluid. This is what it looks like when you have both. So here's that diaphragm in the middle, kind of flopping around, peritoneal fluid, thoracic fluid. This is why it's a good idea to look for both the mirror sign and the spine sign. While the textures above and below the diaphragm are pretty similar here, you have the thoracic vertebral body able to be visualized. So this is a pleural effusion that is probably an exudate, and that's why it has a similar echotexture as what's below the diaphragm. So just be careful with this. So if you want to know a little bit more about pleural effusions, such as how to quantify it and how to tell the difference between an exudate and a transudate, please press the link below. That's it for this week's 5-Minute Sono. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to send me an email or a tweet. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. Go to blog.5minutesono.com/subscribe. Put in your name and your email address in the little text boxes and never miss another video. And if you want these sent directly to your smart devices, just go to iTunes or Stitcher or whatever podcasting service you use. Leave me a rating and a review and subscribe.